Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kyle Wang. I serve as the chair of Yale International Alliance. On behalf of YIA and the Yale Divinity School, I'm delighted to present today's webinar, Healing with Hope, with Father Greg Boyle and Dean Greg Sterling. First, let me say a few words about the YIA. YIA is a Yale alumni shared interest group. We promote the concept and practice of a global citizenship by connecting and inspiring Yale alumni and the general public. Also by fostering understanding and appreciation among peoples of the world. We do this through many programs like this. It's all free to public and field projects and in the spirit of a service and enablement to help the world to heal and to become a better place for all of us and our children. And our guests today need no lengthy introduction. Their work of transforming thousands of lives through service, faith, and education speaks for itself. Please join me to welcome Father Greg and Dean Sterling. We'll start with a video clip, and at the end of the conversation, we'll have a short Q&A. Let's start.
Dear God, do I really deserve this disgrace?
The way that I was living, it was called suicidal. And I was willing to risk it all, man, for the next sack, man. I was like a straight lawnmower. I'm taking anything that's in front of me, man. They didn't care if it was my kids, they didn't care if it was my parents, they didn't care if it was family or friends, man. And I was willing to risk those relationships, man, for one more balloon.
With the latch keys and losers and scared.
I walked through those doors maybe weighing 85 pounds. I could not get off of heroin, and I could not stay out of prison until they took my child from me, DCFS. And those people were not the enemy.
Sometimes society says, well, they have a choice. They have a choice. And I said, well, I didn't have that choice because I didn't choose to be born into a heroin addict as a father. I didn't have that choice. If I did, if I can be in my mother's womb and, check what I want as parent.
To find me some peace with angels and
They made us smaller. I've been down too long.
That's for the real. I was with the zombies, the vampires, and all that, man, in the streets. And I came and met G, and everything came alive, man.
Here we want to take seriously what Jesus took seriously, which is inclusion, nonviolence, unconditional loving kindness, and compassionate acceptance. So that's what Jesus took seriously, and only those four things really.
You walk through these glass doors, they can see their future.
Homeboy is a place where you find love, where you find friendship, but most important thing, you find the love of God.
Father G, welcome back to Yale. It's great to have you with us today.
Thank you. It's great to be with all of you.
So I've admired your work for many years, and I know many of the people listening and watching are in the same category. Let me start with a kind of a broad question. You have been leading Homeboy Industries for about 34 years now, and you've worked with gang members or former gang members for longer than that. How has Homeboy Industries and your vision of that evolved over those 34 years? How have you changed your thinking, or in what ways have you changed your thinking?
Yeah, I think initially, we started a school because we had so many middle school, junior high age gang members who had been kicked out of their home school. So they were wreaking havoc in the projects and selling drugs and were violent. So I would walk out to them. I said, if I found a school that would take you, would you go? And they said, yeah. And then I couldn't find a school that would take them. So I ended up, we started we asked the nuns to leave the convent. We bought a house for them in the community. We turned the convent into a school. So then gang members from all the 8 gangs who were at war with each other came to the school. It was a very tense school and fights every day. And then they would say, if only we had jobs. So then we tried to find jobs. So in the early days, our first 10, 15 years, our t-shirt said, nothing stops a bullet like a job. And then we, tried to find, felony-friendly employers. But somewhere like 15 years into our 34 years, we kind of realized that an employed gang member may or may not go back to prison, and an educated one may or may not. But then we discovered that a healed gang member will not ever reoffend. And so that became our contention and our guarantee. So we, have dedicated ourselves now mainly to creating a culture that heals, a place where people can be held and cherished, and where they can transform their pain so they don't have to transmit it anymore. So that's kind of where we are now, and that's where we've been for the last almost 20 years.
Yeah, let's pursue that a little bit. I heard, this was the first time I saw the clip was just now with everybody else watching this video. But one of the people interviewed talked about the fact that his father was a heroin addict, or his mother was a heroin addict. And I know that there's a phenomenon called Adverse Childhood Experiences Study Scale, in which both physicians and psychologists have studied children that have traumatic experiences and the lasting impact either on their physical health or their social behavior. And I'm wondering if you can tell us, use some kind of a rough estimate of the people who come through your doors, approximately how many, what percentage have had terrible traumas in their childhood, and how do you help them heal and overcome the lasting effects of those traumatic experiences?
Yeah, so I grew up in the gang capital of the world, and I'm a 0 on the ACEs, and it's a scale of 10, and that's more a testament to my own white privilege and the fact that I won every imaginable lottery from parents to zip code, and it's just fortunate that I'm a 0. And they say that if you're a 4 or a 5 on the ACEs, then you're likely, as you say, to have health problems or socializing difficulties. But everybody who walks through these doors here, they're a 9 or a 10 on the ACEs, which is extraordinary and hard to kind of wrap your mind around that. So everyone comes through those doors with what psychologists would call a disorganized attachment. Mom was frightening or frightened, and you can't calm yourself down if you've never been soothed. And so they're held here. And, if it's true that a traumatized person is likely to cause trauma, it has to be equally true that a cherished person will be able to find their way to the joy there is in cherishing themselves and others. And so that's the hope, and so we want to be able to get to a place where people feel held, and then they find this place as a sanctuary, a culture that's therapeutic and cares for them. And then they become the sanctuary that they sought, and then they go home to their kids and they present that sanctuary, and for the first time ever, you've broken the cycle. So that's kind of how it works.
Well, that's powerful, and you've been very effective. There's a video that we have, just very short clip of one of the homeboys who's thinking about this with a past with some regret. Maybe we could run that now.
I have a purpose. Like I take life seriously. Life is It's serious. Like now, before I didn't care. I wanted to die. That's why I would slam so much dope, just hoping I would die one day. And I just keep waking up. Or every time I was just not sleeping for weeks, but I'll wake up, be like, man, I'm still here. But now I have a purpose. I don't want to die like my brother did. You know, I don't want to die as an addict.
Homeboy really receives people no one else wants to deal with. People who, carry a whole backpack filled of chronic toxic stress and unspeakable things have been done to them. And then they find home, and it's kind of more home than home.
In the midst of what they call a spiritual awakening, an epiphany, a moment of clarity, many people call it different things, something happened, man. I think I just started to get tired, and I wanted something different. I just didn't know what that was. For sure, it wasn't a needle no more. Right there was my moment of clarity, and I said, this is it, man. Like, everything I done, all the work that I put in the streets, all the drugs, everything that I chose over family, is this my grand prize. I wish they were here to share this with me. I wish I could have been a light of shine in their life, man. That I could have been that hope that we all seek for as kids. And that I could have been that one individual that, like, hey, check this out, homie. I figured out the antidote that has helped me. Let's see if it can work for you.
Well, there's something that turns the light switch on, but nobody can do that for anybody else. You just have to get to a place where it makes sense to walk towards the light and walk towards health.
Well, that's a powerful story. I'd like to explore some of the specific ways that you help people heal and turn and come to this realization. So let's start with one of the most obvious. Just take the sequence in which you lined out your history, and that's work. And I know that in the beginning of Tattoos on the Heart, your first book, you tell the story about opening the bakery and then other industries. And I think now you have about 8 different industries in Homeboy Industries, or 8 different shops. And I'm wondering if you would reflect a bit on the meaning of work and self-respect and the importance of providing a job, not simply as a paycheck, but psychologically.
Yeah, I suppose, again, in the beginning, that was kind of central. And now everything is secondary to the healing culture of this place. So, people talk a lot about systems, and systems change when people change. And people change when they are cherished. And so we have actually 10 enterprises at the moment, and that's good because people need to feed themselves and pay their rent. But I travel around a lot in the country, and I've probably visited every comparable program to Homeboy, and every place, every city, every county, they all have the same menu of services, and anger management and therapy and GED and parenting, whatever it is, it's almost identical, the menu of services. And all of that is secondary to the culture. I think that's kind of our secret sauce here at Homeboy, is that people really do feel held, and it's a safe place where they can excavate their wounds. And unless you are friends with your wound, you will be tempted to despise the wounded. And that's kind of around here we talk about people having done the work or not doing the work, or are people strangers to themselves, or are they not? And that's just so key. Now, work is dignifying, and every gang member wants a reason to get up in the morning and a reason not to gang bang the night before. Every gang member I know wants their mom to be proud of them. So so work, yes, is essential, but I think we had the cart before the horse in our early years. We were just so job, job, job. And that's because we listened to gang members. But once we knew gang members, then it was a different story. Then you knew, oh, you need to heal. And certainly, the day will come when we stop punishing wound and seek rather to heal it.
Yes. Then one of the listeners or viewers just wrote in that this is why prisons don't work, to change people. They don't cherish people, they do the opposite of that. I would be very interested in hearing you, as you talk about cherishing people, reflect a little bit about the role of faith or spirituality. So everyone knows you're a Jesuit priest. You make no secret of that. You're very open about that, and yet Homeboys doesn't have any explicit ties to a religious tradition. So what are the ways in which faith or spirituality helps in the healing process? And are there ways in which religion has hurt what you're trying to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think in as much as religion has sort of cast its lot with, the notion of good and bad and evil and sin, and those aren't very helpful categories. And I've been working with gang members for 40 years, so I know how unhelpful it is. And maybe it worked, but not everything that works helps. But everything that helps works. So you want to do the thing that helps. You want to invite people to joy, and you want people to fully inhabit the truth of who they are and find their true selves in loving. I was giving a talk a couple of weeks ago in Houston, and a high school girl asked me, well, how do you talk about God if gang members, aren't that interested? And I said, I don't talk about God. And that's mainly because God doesn't want me to talk about God. God wants me to be in the world who God is. And, so you receive the tender glance, and you want to be that tender glance in the world. And so you want to sing the song without the words, as the poet says. And so like this morning, we did have Ash Wednesday here to our 500 workers in the Church of Homeboy, if you will. But it's a way of having access, and people were free to receive ashes or not. And we had a little service, and we explained it, and that's the most explicit we ever get. But it was just at the tail end of our morning meeting, and it was about move beyond the mind you have, and which is what the word repent means. And so we were recommitting to to love, being loving, and to know that love never stops loving. And so with every breath we take, we want to be committed to that endeavor. And that's a thing that transcends organized religion, of course. But you want people to see themselves as God does, and that's liberating, because then they'll become that truth, and they'll inhabit that truth. And honest to God, no bullet can pierce it, and no 4 prison walls can ever keep that out. And death can't even touch it, because it's really that enormous. So my friend Mirabai Starr, who's a mystic and writes about mystics, always says, once you know the God of love, you fire all the other gods. And so that's what maturation in faith looks like. You're trying to fire the gods that keep you with a partial view of God, rather than the spacious, wide open, expansive place where God is inviting us all. So the only non-delusional response to everything is kindness, and that's who our God is.
Okay, so I did hear in the comments of a number of the homeboys interviewed, references to God and to spirituality. They seem to have picked up on that. You've been very effective with what you are doing there in Los Angeles. In the United States, we have enormous social issues right now, and I mean, we could give a whole litany, but one could think of racism, a prison industry, poverty, which is highlighted by the growing gap in wealth, etc. If you were to offer advice to people working on other social challenges, you work in one particular social challenge, what would you say to them? What advice would you give them if they were trying to think about how could they be more effective in dealing with racial issues, dealing with economic issues? It doesn't really matter. What would you say?
So my iPad just, or whatever it is, the iPod just fell out. So I hope you can still hear me.
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, I think our diagnosis is always so wrong, and we're all invited to be healthy and whole, and somehow to how do we walk each other home and love each other into wholeness? Nobody healthy in the history of the world has ever attacked an aged Asian woman on the street of San Francisco. Ever. That's never happened. So once don't you diagnose it well? The problem with sort of denouncing things is you kind of go, all you're saying is something's egregious, but you're not seeing it in the mystical consciousnness of God that wants to get underneath things. And somehow, as the homies say, how do you find the thorn underneath? My starting point is everybody's unshakably good and we belong to each other. Now let's roll up our sleeves. How do we love each other into wholeness? Otherwise, it's high moral distance and it's about me and it's self-congratulatory. Yeah, I'm not that interested in that. How do we bridge the distance that separates us? Separation is an illusion. How do we obliterate it once and for all? There is no us and them. There's just us. So, but we get on our high horse and we say, well, this is this and that is that. And I don't know. Nobody's ever met a healthy person who was a racist. Sorry. And nobody's ever met a whole person who was a homophobe. I'm sorry. And nobody's ever met a well person who was a white supremacist. It's never happened. And once it's about wholeness and health and wellness, well, then you can you don't have to judge people. You just have to love and work towards people, being healthy and whole. And we were all born into the world wanting the same things, like in those videos you saw. And we're all naked under our clothes, and we're human beings, and we all have the same last name, Beings. So there's no need to draw a line that separates us. We should be about erasing lines. And that's why you stand at the margins, so that, that the margins get erased. And how do we imagine a circle of compassion and then imagine nobody standing outside that circle? That's what we're called to do.
It would be wonderful if all would adopt that perspective. You've persuaded a lot of people that this is the right way to think about healing society. The Homeboy Network has become the model for more than, and my numbers may be old, they were taken from your webpage, but more than 250 organizations, and I counted the states, 32 states in over 20 countries. So it's had an enormous impact. And in a recent interview with you, I heard you say that we are more outcome, or we are more uh, outcome aware, but not outcome driven. And I'm wondering if you could reflect on that just a little bit. I probably many of us associated with Yale are pretty success driven, just as a point of confession. But you don't like that word. Could you elaborate on our audience the way that you think about this? About how
Yeah, so exactly. So, the Mother Teresa used to say, we're not called to be successful, we're called to be faithful. So we want to somehow be anchored in our own fidelity. And it's that flies in the face of a lot of things, people, especially with nonprofits, how are you driven by evidence-based outcomes? And I'm kind of not interested. I was reading the other day in 1 Corinthians 13 where they have those 3 words: love never fails. But then I read another translation of it, and it said, love never stops loving. And I like that way better, because it's not about success or failure. It's not about measuring. It's not about how effective is your love. It's about love never stops loving. Yes, that's it. And so you say dedicated to that, and then you're driven by the right thing. And the reason why people burn out and get depleted is not because they're so compassionate. It's because they've allowed it to become about them, and about fixing and saving and rescuing and transforming. And so that's why people stop standing at the margins with the poor and the powerless, because it's about outcomes. But if it's about love never stops loving, well, then you're delighting in whoever you're encountering, and you're standing in what St. Ignatius of Loyola would call affectionate awe. And so you don't go to the margins to make a difference. You go to the margins so that the folks at the margins make you different. Then that's eternally replenishing. That never wears out.
So, what are the things that have given you pause in your 40 years of working with gang members or former gang members? Have there been any things where you've just asked yourself, can I continue doing this? Or is it more a question of, how could I stop doing this?
Yeah, I think in the early days when I did it incorrectly, when it was about rescuing, fixing, and saving, yeah, then you have all this whole other slew of things like disappointment. I don't do disappointment anymore. I don't do discouragement. I don't, it's just, if all you are focused on in your own personal practice is to cherish and to love as you are loved, and to love without measure and without regret, then you don't do discouragement, and you don't do measuring, and you don't do disappointment. You don't do any of those things, and then all of a sudden outcomes are, and I know that stance in the world is helpful, but where we begin is what works. And not everything that works helps, but everything that helps works. So invite people to inhabiting the truth of who they are, and invite people to real life joy, as Jesus says, my joy, yours, your joy complete. Invite them to joy, and everything will work out. It just does. But if you try to kind of be effective, and I'm going to only do the things that work, oh my gosh, it just doesn't work. You get depleted, and I don't think ours is a God who measures. We do, and it's part of our sadness. And the only joy there is in loving. I wish it were more complicated because then I would sound smarter, but it isn't.
Well, you've certainly demonstrated the effectiveness of that. You you have written 3 books, and first one was on the New York Times bestsellers list, Tattoos on the Heart, and then that dealt heavily with compassion. Then you wrote Barking to the Choir, which dealt with kinship, and now you have a fairly recent book, The Whole Language, which is about tenderness. But when I've read your books, one of the things that strikes me is that while you emphasize a particular overarching theme, the books are mainly stories about people in Homeboy's Industries. They're stories about the people there. Some of them are hilarious. I will confess, I have simply broken out in laughter on a couple of occasions in reading some of these stories. Some of them are very moving and powerful emotionally. But I'm wondering if you could share with us your rationale for telling the stories of the peoples there. You clearly want all of us to know what these people are like. So unpack that a little, if you would.
Well, I part of the thing is that's around here. The homies always say, at Homeboy we laugh from the stomach, and I know exactly what that means. It's not superficial. It's really quite a deep place, but it's a healing place. It's a place where people are really engaged in relational wholeness, and that's what you want. And so people will often kind of say to me, "Oh my God, it must be so hard." 2 weeks ago, I buried my 254th young person killed in our streets for no reason, a 14-year-old named Jeremy. And it's heartbreaking. And you walk with people and it just tears you apart. And yet, and people say it must be hard. And I go, well, it's mainly, it gives me life. So I had a gang member in my office the other day sitting behind my desk where I am right here. And his name was Trayvon, and he just did 23 years in prison. So I'm writing on a piece of paper like this. I'm saying drug test any Friday at 10, which that's how you begin the process. So as I'm writing, I said, "Hey, how'd you hear about Homeboy?" And he said, "Oh, some female told me about it." And then he said, "Yeah, you fathered her children." And I stopped writing. I said, say what now? And he kind of looked at the words kind of floating in the air and he goes, "Well, that's not right." "Oh, you baptized her children." And I said, and the two of us, we just fell out of our chairs. And I hired him right away without a drug test, just because he made me laugh. And I thought, well, welcome to the human race, And God kind of made us because God thought we'd enjoy ourselves. So we might as well.
Well, I will just tell you that one of my favorite stories, there was a woman named Glenda in Barking to the Choir the very first part of that book, who was serving Meryl Streep.
No, Diane Keaton.
Diane Keaton.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, that was a great story. I confess, I just burst out laughing when I read that.
Yeah, she didn't know who she was. And she says, I feel like I've met you before. And Diane Keaton says, "Oh, I guess I have one of those faces that people think they've seen before." And then Glenda goes, "No, wait a minute. We were locked up together." And that just took my breath away when I heard it later. And I don't believe we've had any further Diane Keaton sightings. But,
her agent won't let her come. Well, we have another video clip, just a short one, of somebody whose life was healed in a profound way there. And so if we can run that and just share that with our audience, that'd be great.
You want to create a community of tenderness, because the highest form of spiritual maturity is tenderness, and so if love is the answer, community is the context, but tenderness is the methodology. That's the connective tissue that joins us together. Otherwise, love stays up in the air or in your head or even in your heart. But unless it becomes tender, then it doesn't connect. And, only the soul that ventilates the world with tenderness has any chance of changing it. So here we foster a kind of a place of tenderness so that people feel connected to each other.
And that's what we find here. We find that love, we find that healing, we find that power of space, of being able to have a community of folks that know you, can love you in our imperfections, to a place of being able to find that healing. And then from there we go back into the community, go back to our homes, go back to rebuild, and to be able to take what we're experiencing here into our neighborhoods, into our streets, because it's so necessary now more than ever.
And thank God for places like Homeboy Industries, most importantly, people like Father Gregory Boyle, the founder of Homeboy. And he kept his promise. He said the minute I deal with my drug problem, that he will give me a stepping stone to get my life back on track. And I went to rehab, and that's when I started to really unpackage whatever it is that I was running from, in this case, my trauma that was instilled into me by my father and my upbringing, the abandonment, the neglect, the rejection, the low self-esteem, the oppression from his drug addiction. I used to blame my father for everything, thinking that it was him, he knew better. It was never my father, it was heroin. Eventually then, I was able to forgive him, came back to Homeboy Industries. I was seeking Father Greg Boyle. I've known him since I was 10 years old, and I wanted to continue to redirect my life and change. But in order to do so, I had to have some kind of sustainability, some kind of safe haven, and so that I don't go back to the old ways. If there's anything that I can do in this lifetime, is to continue to demonstrate to the world that change is possible. By doing art, you have become vulnerable. You have opened up something, and actually it's mindfulness, and by doing art, then you're actually experimenting, exploring, and as you're drawing, you're organizing, you're aligning yourself. Mind, body, and spirit is happening. And the beauty for me as an instructor or a facilitator is that art, being the bridge, allows me to get into places in ways that I cannot do it like this on a one-on-one. So art is my point of engagement and entry, because as they're drawing, I'm asking and probing the proper questions to get to the core. Unconsciously, they're speaking because they're so intrigued by the art. So their vulnerability and their defenses drop.
Principal suffering of the poor is shame and disgrace. So if you can at least get to a place where you dismantle those messages of shame and disgrace and replace them with the truth, not with some Pollyanna truth, but the truth that he is exactly what God had in mind when God made him. And so once he knows that truth, he'll become that truth, he inhabits that truth, and that's a powerful thing to have happen.
Those are very powerful stories. You emphasize kinship and tenderness, and you're living in the middle of a large Latinx community in Southern California, but Southern California has a lot of different communities within it, the LA area. And right now, as a country, we feel tensions in a way that, at least I would say in my life, I haven't felt since the 60s, the kinds of social tensions that we have experienced in the last few years. Unfortunately, the war in Ukraine is changing some things, or maybe it's fortunately bringing some of us together, but it's a terrible reason to bring us together. How do you experience that at Homeboy? Do you struggle with some of the same tensions? I sometimes tell people about Yale, most people who come to Yale want to change the world. And so what happens is they're very sensitive to the larger issues. And when they come here, they're reflected exponentially, those tensions, because of the desire to change the world. So you have a subset of people but they feel those same tensions in very powerful ways, I'm sure. How are those reflected, and how do you help people cope?
Well, there's a pronounced thing here because you have the gang. Everybody here has multiple enemy rival gang members that they have to work with. So there's that. Everybody comes out of prison where the races are the segregation is so pronounced, and so they come back here, a place that's just filled with gang members, and so it's hard to kind of feel like you don't want the African Americans over here and then the Latinos over here, so it's difficult, but the homies will say, we're used to being watched. We're not used to being seen. And so there's something about being seen. The Buddhists would say, "Oh, nobly born, remember who you really are." So it's about really seeing people so that everybody feels a little bit less invisible. And that somehow is the key to some hallway that'll lead to kinship. The more people who feel seen, a homie said to me once you see me, I will never forget what I look like. And it's in that process that happens with an individual that pretty soon people feel seen and held and cherished in a community of beloved belonging, and that's where you want to be. The great John Lewis says we all live in the same house. He doesn't qualify it and say some live in the basement and some live on the third floor. And it's not aspirational, one day we might all live in the same house. He says it straight out. We all live in the same house. So it's a discovery. We're not trying to achieve it. We're just trying to see that that's exactly the truth. And so it's a great equalizer. And everybody here, all the homies and homegirls, they are anthems of resilience. And once they feel seen and less invisible, then pretty soon everybody is mutually, with the exquisite mutuality, everybody's inhabiting their own nobility and dignity. And it kind of dissipates all the things that kept us apart. The problem is everything's about something else. So if you want to address division head on, good luck with that. And if you want to address racism head on, good luck with that. Because all those things are about something else. And no kinship, no peace. No kinship, no justice. No kinship, no equality. No matter how singularly focused we are on those worthy goals, they actually can't happen unless there's some undergirding sense that we belong to each other. So find the something else is what I always say.
So I've thought about the name of Homeboy Industries and wondered about gender relations, because even the name is loaded. Can you comment a little bit about that? I mean, I'm assuming your answer is the same about how you overcome it, but I'm also wondering if that's a particular challenge.
Not really. I mean, 34 years ago, 97% of all gang members were male and 3% were female. And so it wouldn't have occurred to anybody to call ourselves anything other than Homeboy Industries at that point. We wouldn't have said homeboy / homegirl, just because it was so predominantly a male thing. But then you can't exist in the world today and have a place that only had 97% male. So we changed our mission, our mission statement. Homeboy Industries provides hope, training, and support to formerly gang involved and previously incarcerated people, allowing them to redirect their lives and become contributing members of our community. So once we said previously incarcerated, we could open it up. So every male here is a gang member, and every female is at least a felon, maybe a gang member, but there aren't that many. So we have Homegirl Cafe. Almost 50% of those who work here are female. So we kind of had to change who we were in order to have a place that, was equitable and a place that dealt with men and women. Even though if we just stayed as a formerly gang involved, we would barely have any women here, just because there are so few. And we've hired 3 trans members of our community who came out of prison, and that's good for us. It's healthy for us, because it stands as a model of inclusion, and so all that stuff is healthy.
Okay, I want to ask one last question, then I think we'll open it up to the audience for questions. We just had a very good question. The last question I'll ask you is, you've been doing this for roughly 40 years, there for 34 years. You originally thought you might go to the University of Santa Clara, which is a campus I know and some of the faculty I know, a very different world. But you chose this, or God chose you for this, we might say. But I'm wondering if you can reflect on how have the homeboys and homegirls and the people you worked with, how have they changed you? And if you were to think back to when you were first getting started and the priest you were then, the human being you were, and you think about where you're at today, how are you significantly different as a result of living and working with these people all of these years?
Well, reaching back to the first part of your question, so I was in Bolivia, and I had been scheduled to go to Santa Clara after my year there, but it had so altered my heart that it wasn't enough for me. And so I begged my provincial, please don't send me to Santa Clara. Nothing against Santa Clara, but it was, it wasn't enough. I wanted to work with the poor. And so, as luck would have it, they needed a pastor at Dolores Mission Church. So that led me there. And then once there, I made a lot of mistakes, in as much as, it was kind of to the rescue, which is a crazy thing, because then it's about me, and it can't be about me. So then I changed, about like 10 years in, and I was getting very close to burnout, because it's all about success and failure and outcomes. And then I kind of abandoned that, and I just changed the way I did things. I just kind of, a light bulb went off, and so it changed me forever. And so I always say everything of value I've learned from homies in the last 40 years. And every day they teach me something new about grace and graciousness, and how to be generous of spirit, and how to love with a no matter whatness. Everything that I think is valuable, they've taught me. And then you learn to, make friends with your own woundedness, so that you can not be tempted to despise the wounded. And they've taught me all that. And so, and they teach it to me every day. And so I want to be attentive to who they are and how they are, and what they have to teach me. But the day won't ever come when I have more courage, or I am more noble, or I'm closer to God than they are. And so I sit at their feet, and it always leaves me in a place of humility and love.
So thank you very much. And I have to say, your own humility is very clear. The question is from a man who works as a chaplain in Prison Corrections and wants to know about your thoughts on prison reform. What changes would make a difference in our prisons?
Well, in the prisons, I'm kind of not. I'm a really aerial view guy. So once you get me in the weeds on policy and things like that, I scratch my head a little bit, and that's my own, deficiency. But I know that the goal has to be kinship, and if you believe that every man and woman incarcerated belongs to you, well, then we're going to start to do things different. We're going to try to heal rather than punish, and you're going to, so what I think is true of gang members, kids who join gangs, there's only three profiles. There's the despondent kid, the traumatized kid, or the mentally ill kid. And it's all on a continuum of severity. Some are more mentally ill than despondent, and some are more traumatized than mentally ill. And if you knew that to be the case, you would infuse hope to kids for whom hope is foreign, and you would help heal the damage, and you would deliver mental health services in a timely and culturally appropriate way. That's what you would do, to help kids and to keep them from joining gangs, because that's the only profile. But once you kind of pull the camera back a little bit, you go, oh, well, that's the same profile for any person in prison, and any gang member or returning citizen coming back to the community. It's all the same profile. It's all about a lethal absence of hope, or healing of wounds and brokenness, or delivering mental health services. It's all about that. So we would do well if we kind of had that kind of lens. So nobody has ever met a healthy treatment plan that was born from a bad diagnosis. It just doesn't work. And our problem is that we think that bad people are in prison, which is really not very sophisticated. And the largest mental institution on the planet Earth is Los Angeles County Jail, which tells you everything you need to know.
Yeah.
So it tells you what you need to know about how incorrectly we're seeing this. And so, but none of that will be of any value to anybody unless you think people are unshakably good and they belong to us. That's our starting point. Unfortunately, we think the starting point is rational actor coming from a healthy place. No, there's nobody in prison who was a rational actor coming from a healthy place. Sorry, I was chaplain at Folsom Prison, and I've worked with gang members for 40 years. So you're not talking about folks who are whole and well and healthy. Thoroughly good, it doesn't touch their goodness, doesn't touch how unshakably good they are, and it doesn't touch how deeply they belong to us. But none of us are well until all of us are well. And so how do we reach out to each other? And that's not a superiority thing. I'm healthy, you're not. It's we're all in varying stages of wellness. And we need to help each other. We need to lock arms, and we need to walk each other into wholeness. And anybody who's whole is holy, and anybody who's holy is whole. And so we can do this. But our starting point, wherever you start is where you end up. And if you think it's about bad people doing bad things, you're just going to build more prisons.
All right, thank you. So let's go to the next question. How do you introduce someone suffering from addiction to God if they're strangers?
So somebody who's suffering from addiction, I don't know. I mean, it's like everybody's a stranger until you're not. And that's why it's important here, that everybody see each other and know names, find out what that guy's name is. I mean, we have a lot of people here, and it's hard work, and you have to practice at it. But again, it's not about introducing anybody to God. It's about being in the world who God is. And so then people see you and they go, oh, I understand what this is. I mean, in the end, what do we have? You have scripture and you have tradition, I suppose. But we're utterly reliant on knowing what kind of God we have by seeing people who are whole and healthy and well and who love without measure and without regret. That's how you know what kind of God we have. And so that's important. And in the end, none of us are going to live forever, but we can all live in the forever. And so how do we help each other, stay anchored in the present moment and cherishing with every breath? And people will experience that and they'll say, oh, that's the God we actually have, rather than the God we've settled for. But people need to see it and not wait to hear your preaching on it.
That has a good biblical ring. The next comment is to thank you for your work, and then ask, how can we build on your work in our communities? So how can what you're doing in LA be instantiated in other communities?
Well, it's kind of a model. Homeboy wants to be the front porch of the house everybody wants to live in, that's inclusive. Nobody's left out. Everybody is less invisible with each day that they're seen. Everybody can do that. Unfortunately, we've gotten to a place in our society where we think everything is rarefied, like only gang members can connect to gang members. But if you're the proud owner of a Pulse, then you can do this. You can connect to people, because it's not about yakking. It's not about, let me give you some advice. No, it's listen, love, as they say. So can you receive people? Can you allow yourself to be reached by people? Can you allow your heart to be altered? Well, everybody can do that. So it's not about telling people what to do. It's just listening and receiving them and loving them. And everybody can do that. But we've gotten to this place where we think it's all rarefied and specialized and training and step aside, let me handle this. No, you don't want to do that. So everybody can do it. Everybody can prepare for this, and everybody can be a beneficial presence in the world by being a love that doesn't stop loving.
Well, I want to say personally, and on behalf of Yale, a very special thank you. I was inspired when you came to the Divinity School and lectured in 2015, and I've been inspired again today. And I salute you for your work and your life's dedication to helping people whom others do not fully embrace. Thank you.
It's terrific. Now, in closing, we don't have a lot of time left. I'll do a closing remark. Thank you both, Father G and Dean Sterling, for your thoughts and wisdom in healing people and helping those marginalized to regain meaning in their lives. It's just really like a cases after case, life after death on earth. You've done that so well. I mean, I'm just always in tears when I read your book. You are the messengers of peace and love and compassion and inclusion, with the message that we're all called to envision and build the world where we see fundamentally no us and them. It's only we together. Actually, I'd like to end this event with a quote from Father G's book, The Whole Language. Father G wrote, "It's not about the message. It's not even about the messenger. It's about the nurturing culture and the context that allows everyone to move into their own dignity and nobility. We can work at this and make it our practice, we can help each other to locate the warm sunlight so that the folks can bathe in it. So thank you again, everybody. Thank you again for your participation. Let's work together to foster that kind of a nurturing culture in whatever situation we find ourselves. With that, you shall be a blessing. Thank you. Thank you.